Donald's in a very weak position. The courts are routinely ruling against him. He's had a few wins, but overall, he's losing in the courts. His position that, um, uh, anything he does to save the country is lawful is not sitting well with the courts. He's not doing well in his negotiations, and his deal with the UK is a complete non-deal. He brags about, oh, we're going to be able to have more Rolls Royces. Rolls Royce sold less than 2,000 cars in the US last year in a market with 15, 16 million sales a year. The UK, Starmer came over, posed nicely for Donald with pictures and did nothing of any consequence. And that's the same thing that's happened with the Chinese. The government in Mexico is being very firm because we need Mexican fruits and vegetables much more than they need us. And Donald's complete ignorance is also on display in all of this. And remember, he said, oh, Canada's not a significant trading partner. It's our biggest trading partner. So I think that if Putin were to not show up and Donald were to show up, that would be a real egg in his face.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by best-selling author and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist David Cay Johnston, who has written 3 books on Donald Trump, including his most recent book, The Big Cheat. David, welcome.
Glad to be with you, Louis.
Well, I wanted to start with Trump continuing his trip to the Middle East. He's signed a $142 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. I mean, in a way, is this not Donald the deal maker doing what he does best?
Well, my suspicion is that deal was already in the works. The Saudis buy American-made weaponry, jet fighters, electronics, etc. But Donald will claim credit for anything. In his first term, he boasted that ExxonMobil, because of him, was going to invest $25 billion. Well, you just had to go to ExxonMobil's disclosures and you realize they had, long before he came to the White House, announced $25 billion, which was ordinary capital investment for that huge company. But Donald always claims credit if it's good, and if it isn't, well, that's somebody else's fault.
And what about this donation of a plane that we're hearing to Donald Trump, and the idea that he might even keep it after he leaves the presidency?
Well, the president of the United States may not accept any gift or emolument, which means financial gain, from a foreign government, a king, any foreign entity, or for that matter, from the states, the 50 US states, under the Constitution, unless Congress expressly provides permission to do that. And this is just Donald Trump flouting the Constitution he doesn't understand, flouting the law. I mean, Donald, whom I have covered for 37 years, doesn't believe the rules apply to him. He believes he is special. And as early as 2011, I said, Donald believes that he alone is competent to be president of the US, and he believes he should run the whole country. And I was mocked 14 years ago for that. Lo and behold, what did Donald say a couple of weeks ago in an interview? I run the country and the whole world. And that's how he thinks. He doesn't think the rules apply to him. And so why wouldn't I take the gift? I mean, of course we're going to take the gift. It's never going to be Air Force One. You would have to strip that plane down to the skeleton it was in the Boeing factory in Washington State and rebuild it. And it would require, of course, extensive hardening for electromagnetic impulses in case of a nuclear war. It would have to be set up for refueling in the air. And Boeing is building 2 747s to replace the current one. They're late because they underbid the project, and it's costing Boeing a lot of money. But it's absurd. This is simply a bribe, not yet charged as a crime, and maybe never charged as a crime, but this is just a bribe by the Qataris for things they want from Donald Trump, which include enhancing their own security from other Middle East countries.
And I wonder how you judge the optics of this visit. Trump's again in Qatar today, I believe, and he's brought with him. He's flanked by this gaggle almost of tech entrepreneurs who have come with. I mean, how is this going to be perceived? Do you think back in the States, Trump is going out to make deals for major US corporations? I suppose that could be viewed as a positive light, or is there something a bit seedy about them all being there with the president, possibly for their own interests?
Oh, it's incredibly seedy, but large numbers of Americans, tens of millions of them, believe that all truth emanates from Donald. The internet is full of pictures of him as a religious figure, and I don't mean his pontifical post recently, posing him as a God's savior. And of course, Donald says, "I alone can save you." Those people aren't going to be affected by anything he does. But even a number of conservative Republicans on Capitol Hill are worried about what's going on here because they see their own reelection being endangered by Donald's conduct. One of the most troubling things that happened during his stop in Saudi Arabia was that Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the brilliant cancer doctor and inventor who owns the Los Angeles Times, where I was a reporter for a dozen years long ago, shook the hand of MBS, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, the man who the U.S. government intelligence services say was behind the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was a columnist for the Washington Post. To see an American newspaper publisher shake that man's hand is very disturbing. It's getting a lot of discussion in the private groups of former LA Times people like me. In the tech people who are with him and the LA Times publisher's fortune depends on approvals from the federal government of the new drugs and other treatments for cancer he is developing. They are all there to make sure that Donald is their friend, that they get the approvals they want, whether justified or not. And this is simply a form of tribute to Trump. And Louis, let me go back. On the day Donald Trump was sworn in 2017, there was live TV coverage of him driving to the White House. And unlike the Barack Obama's first inauguration, where the people were packed, curb to building, almost nobody was there. There were a number of places where there were more security people than well-wishers. But Trump stopped the presidential limousine on Constitution Avenue. Everybody covered this. The whole family got out of that car and the follow-up car. They took a 2-minute turn on the pavement and drove on. Only at DC Report, the news service I founded, did anyone know where he stopped, which was in front of the Trump Hotel. Because the signal he was sending is that if you want favors from me, you will first pay tribute. And so we saw the Saudis rent out entire floors at the rack rate. Next time you go in a hotel, look at the sign on the back door. You may have paid $99, but the rack rate could be $500. And the signal was very clear. And Trump took in, at a minimum, because we haven't been able to get all the records, $1.7 billion from foreign governments, favor seekers, state governments, local governments during his presidency. That's small potatoes compared to what's going on now.
Well, and there is also this concern about the Trump family's involvement in cryptocurrencies, which they're trying to get a lot of investment for while they're over there as well. I mean, is that part of this kind of Trump seems to be making a lot of money out of being the president?
Oh, yes. I mean, Donald is monetizing the presidency, but on a grand scale this time. He has refused to fill out his legally required Office of Government Ethics financial disclosure. So we don't know how much money is going into his pocket. We only know the public announcements have been made. So Middle East interests have put, I believe it's $2 billion into cryptocurrencies. One country alone, $300 million. There are people who have been established as money launderers whom Trump is getting money from now. And of course, Trump has pardoned in the last 100 and some days a whole bunch of serious criminals, not just the people who attacked police and tried to overthrow the government on January 6th, but the guy who ran the Silk Road, which was a way for both drug traffickers and terrorists to move money, people who were major drug traffickers. And of course, Donald has spent his entire life gratuitously involved with criminals. In my book, The Making of Donald Trump, there's a whole chapter about Donald's up to his eyeballs involvement with his business partner, Joseph Wexelbaum, who is a 3-time convicted heavyweight felon who confessed in writing, I have his handwritten confession, to being one of the biggest drug traffickers in America. And Donald did the most extraordinary favors for this man, favors that make no sense whatsoever for anyone, but especially, as Donald was at the time, someone who owns casinos in New Jersey where you were prohibited from engaging in business with criminals. So Donald, this is to Donald nothing new. Many American national security interest folks would regard the Middle East in large part as a group of businesses posing as countries. And Donald would simply go, "Oh, look, they love me. They love me. Look at the parades they're putting on. Oh, they had horses surrounding my limousine. This is just so wonderful." And he wouldn't see anything beyond that, because flattery with Donald, I learned from long personal experience, if you flatter Donald, it's amazing what you will get him to give up in a negotiation.
And one person who was also in Saudi Arabia yesterday, who you mentioned hotels before, there's been ideas that he's going to offer Trump some sort of tower or hotel development opportunity in Damascus, is the new leader of Syria. What sort of relationship do you think Trump could end up forging with the new Syrian leader?
Well, it'd be entirely transactional. That's what Donald's life is. Donald is an empty vessel inside. The reason he claims his buildings are bigger than they are, his fortune is vastly bigger than it at least was in the past, that he's the greatest lover of all time and other nonsense, is because inside he is just a hollow vessel. And this is a man who has never known love or contentment or joy. Watch the few times he's tried to tell a joke on video. It's like watching a hostage video. He can't do it. He can't make fun of himself, and he can't stand other people doing that. All of that because he's such an insecure person inside. And frankly, Louis, if you had grown up in the Trump household, or I had, we might well be just as messed up as Donald is. It was a horrible, horrible place. His mother was cold and distant, and his father, Fred, was so utterly focused on what he called winning, which meant get the money without getting arrested, that a little boy named Johnny Messer, who lived down the street, rode past the Trump house on his bicycle as Fred Trump was coming home in his huge Cadillac Eldorado, the biggest Cadillac you could buy. And he dropped a quarter out of his pocket. And he turned around on his bicycle to go back to get it. And Fred Trump went out on the public sidewalk in front of the house, picked up the quarter, held it up to the little 8-year-old or 7-year-old boy's face and went, "This is mine now." I mean, think about what kind of a monster does something like that. And you can see why Donald Trump psychologically is such a hollow, sad story. I refer to his life as, in reference to the comedy film Groundhog Day. This is Groundhog Day, the endless nightmare.
Well, outside of Saudi Arabia, while Donald Trump's trip to the Middle East continues, the US is also continuing talks with China. We saw US stocks rebound essentially after those talks were agreed. There was a lot of pressure to get those talks underway. Is this, in a way, Trumponomics working, or is it something of a climb down in the fact that they've had to take the tariffs off China?
Well, what did China give up? Donald often in negotiating stakes out some horrendous position that he knows he'll have to pull back from. Historically, he dealt with people who were financially in trouble, whom he had paid someone to gather dirt on so that he could say, imply that, well, I'm going to tell, your wife about your girlfriend or something. And that doesn't work as president. The Chinese are less and less dependent on the U.S. They aren't even the largest holders of U.S. foreign debt. That's Japan, which has told Trump, mess with us and we'll just dump our $1 trillion of U.S. publicly traded debt. China is increasing its markets elsewhere. And you'll see the Chinese, who are very highly educated and think strategically in long term, outwit Donald at every turn. One of the things Donald has done is caused horrible harm to small businesses. When he announced that he was reducing the tariffs to 30%, that didn't apply to people who own a little business. So if you own a shop that sells souvenirs and things on Broadway or one of the New Jersey boardwalks or on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, you're still subject to the 145% tariff on the goods you're buying. And this very much reflects how Trump doesn't care about working people. He doesn't care about small business owners, most of whom are just working people who own their own job. He is there to deal with people he imagines himself to be like, very wealthy people, and he wants their approval. He didn't care about other people.
And what do you make in all of this of the role of Scott Bessent, the in Trump's inner circle? He seems to have almost come forward as one of the kind of adults in the room. He went to Ukraine and managed to get the deal signed there, and he's now leading on the China talks. Do you think Donald's going to give him the space to get these talks done, or is he going to want to be as involved in this again?
Well, most of the people in Trump's cabinet are utterly and completely incompetent and don't belong there, and that's been well established by others. Bessent is someone who is, at least on paper, qualified. Donald will allow him to do things up to the point that it either embarrasses Donald, outshines Donald, or becomes a problem. And then, of course, Donald will push him onto his own sword. The only person Donald allows to outshine him is Elon Musk, which suggests very strongly that there is an unseen financial relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Remember, Donald is on the hook for over $600 million in 2 civil cases. And it may well be the reason he was able to get bonds to cover these costs, which was surprising. It doesn't cover all of them, but it covers all of one and most of the, or half of the other. May well be that there's what's known as a back-to-back deal. The bond company officially will make the payment, but Elon Musk has guaranteed the payment in the background. I mean, why else would Donald allow Elon Musk to outshine him again and again, even in the Oval Office?
And Scott Bessent talks about securing these talks, and he said that Trump's strategic uncertainty is something that's helped him along in doing that. I mean, is that uncertainty really what's brought China to the table here, do you think?
I think China has agreed to talk because it's in their interest to do so. And they understand perfectly well that Donald is appallingly ignorant. He has a degree in economics, but I can tell you from the hundreds of hours I've spent talking with Donald, he doesn't know anything about economics. He believes in mercantilism, although he doesn't even know what that is, which was the economic theory before Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, that if you have a piece of gold, that means I don't have it. And the only way for me to get wealthier is to get it from you. And that's how he talks. You know, all these countries are ripping us off. You know, we're being ripped off everywhere because that's how he sees the world, because that's how he spent his life, cheating other people to get money. Now, the Chinese, deeply educated, very strategic thinkers. One of the things I've been struck by on my trips to China is that, you know, American interstate highways are pretty good. The Autobahn is a lot better. So's the M1 and the other big freeways in Britain. But you go on a Chinese highway, whether it's in Beijing or Guangzhou or clear in the middle of the country in Chengdu, it's like, wow, this is how to build a road. And they think like the Catholic Church in terms of we're here forever, whereas American businesses think in 90-day terms, Congress people in 2-year terms, and Donald in terms of 5 minutes from now.
Well, speaking of uncertainty, there's a lot of uncertainty about what is going to happen with the talks over Ukraine in Turkey, that Putin, whether or not Putin is actually going to turn up to those. Was it smart for Trump to swap out the threats and pressure for a ceasefire for these unconditional talks?
Well, understand Donald is not a strategic thinker, okay? If you asked him to tell you what is the difference between Great Britain and the United Kingdom, he couldn't tell you. And he's the president. I don't expect most people to know that, but the president should be able to know that. If you asked him what's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia, which is incredibly important in the Middle East, he wouldn't have a clue and he would go off on a tangent. So Donald promised that upon his election in one day, he would settle the war. That clearly hasn't worked. Vladimir Putin is very clear on the record, and has been for more than 2 decades, more than a quarter century actually, that he wants to put back together the old Soviet empire. And I have by marriage relatives who live behind what was the Iron Curtain, and they, you know, what do they tell me? Oh, if Donald isn't stopped in Ukraine, it's just a matter of time before the Russian tanks come and we're back under the boot of the Kremlin. So Putin is not going to give up unless he has to. And Donald, of course, has been spouting Putin's propaganda. Ukraine started the war, being the best example of this. The Ukrainian people are not going to surrender if they can avoid it. Their military has come up with extraordinarily smart, low-cost tactics that were going to be studied in war colleges all around the world 1,000 years from now. And Donald simply doesn't know what to do with Vladimir Putin, who is not going to be subject to his flattery.
Do you think we've seen something of a shift, though, in the White House position on Ukraine and Russia? I mean, even J.D. Vance has admitted when he in a trip to Europe last week that Russia is asking for too much. Do you think that even people like Vance are changing their mind on this, Ukraine might have a reason to feel more confident?
Well, very clearly, Vladimir Putin's missteps here in thinking Donald was still going to be his lapdog have not worked. Trump has begun to realize, and J.D. Vance has been his spokesperson so he can have deniability, that he's not getting what he wants. And so this is going to be very difficult for Trump, because if he can't deliver on this, it will cost him politically. It will cost him both with obedient Republicans on Capitol Hill, who I often refer to as the Quisling Republicans. They are so willing to ignore the rule of law and to win over Donald's favor. But it's also going to hurt him with some part of his base, especially those who are either veterans or who have family ties to Ukraine or any of the other countries of the old Soviet Union. Poland, Belarus, Moldova, etc. And so Trump's actually created quite a problem for himself here. I think this will take a while to play out. In the meantime, Putin has so exhausted his military that he has acknowledged that they are using donkey carts to bring munitions and food to the front, and their defense of that was hilarious. Militaries have always used donkey carts. Yeah, well, we quit using our, actual horse cavalry too, more than 100 years ago. He's in real trouble there, and his economy is a complete disaster. They've been reduced to barter, to import, among other things, potatoes. Russia has had to import potatoes. That should tell you how much trouble his economy is in. Now, the Russian people are used to both dictators and privation. So I don't think you're going to see a violent uprising against Putin. That might be a very good thing, but I just don't expect to see that. But Putin is the one right now who needs a peace. He needs time to rebuild his military so that his army of conquest can continue. And they've announced they intend to have massive additional conscription of young men. In Russia, they, of course, have brought all sorts of prisoners out, and their soldiers have proven so ineffective that in the 12 months ending in February, the Russians, it was reported widely, the Russians have gained ground. They gained 0.5% of the territory of Ukraine at a cost of 400,000 dead soldiers. That has to be the biggest butcher bill per square kilometer in the history of military action.
And just finally, David, Trump has even suggested he could attend these talks in Turkey. You talk about this building to a bit of a crisis point, perhaps, for Trump. How's it going to look if Putin doesn't show up to these talks on Thursday?
Oh, I think that Trump will look foolish and naive to everybody who's not a solid member of MAGA. Donald's in a very weak position. The courts are routinely ruling against him. He's had a few wins, but overall, he's losing in the courts. His position that, anything he does to save the country is lawful is not sitting well with the courts. He's not doing well in his negotiations, and his deal with the UK is a complete non-deal. He brags about, we're going to be able to have more Rolls Royces. Rolls Royce sold less than 2,000 cars in the US last year in a market with 15, 16 million sales a year. The UK, Starmer came over, posed nicely for Donald with pictures and did nothing of any consequence. And that's the same thing that's happened with the Chinese. The government in Mexico is being very firm because we need Mexican fruits and vegetables much more than they need us. And Donald's complete ignorance is also on display in all of this. And remember, he said, oh, Canada's not a significant trading partner. It's our biggest trading partner. So I think that if Putin were to not show up and Donald were to show up, that would be a real egg in his face. And I assure you that if they know Putin is not on an airplane, Donald's not going to be on an airplane. They're not, the people around Donald this time in this administration many of them are competent managers and they're zealots. Unlike the first time around when he had competent managers who loved the Constitution and reigned in Trump.
Well, David Cay Johnston, thank you very much for joining me today on the Trump Report.
Glad to be with you, Louis.